Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are joined today by Alastair Crooke, a former British diplomat, to discuss Europe-Russian relations. So, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Yeah.
So, this diplomatic efforts appears to be reaching more or less a deadline. That is, the Russians want to address the root causes. The Europeans, well, some of them at least, still seem to hope for an unconditional ceasefire. I was wondering how you read this very divergent positions, and is there any possibility of actually bridging them and find some common meeting point where peace could actually be achieved?
Oh, I read them as being divergent. I mean, and unchangingly divergent so far. I mean, it's quite clear that that Zelensky has not conceded an inch on any point after the meetings after Alaska at the White House. There was says no to everything effectively. And at the same time, Russia, there is a little bit of flexibility, but it sticks to the points that it made, the framework that it outlined on the 14th of June in Moscow at the foreign ministry. Putin's laid out what was going to be the Russian position. So not really, but I mean, what did change at Alaska, at Anchorage, was the move, if you like, from the ceasefire program. It may come back, but it was temporarily at least removed. And Trump accepted the idea of that a solution could be enforced on Zelensky and the Europeans through force of arms by Russia, i.e., on the battlefield. It would be decided on the battlefield and then would be, if you like, ratified in some sort of agreement subsequently. So nothing in that sense has changed. There's a lot of noise and chatter about guarantees and security guarantees, but there's really not anything much in that either at all, because first of all, security guarantees depend on Russia to consent to them. But secondly, the security guarantees are quite clearly, there's a lot of obfuscation about it, but it's pretty clear that the United States are not going to back it up in any meaningful way. And the Europeans, and certainly Britain and France and I think Germany, understand, that they can't enter the battleground, if you like, of Ukraine without any backup from the United States or when any promised backup from the United States. And so-called Russia is clear. There will be no NATO troops in Ukraine as peacekeepers in this sense. Of course, in fact, I think the April 22 paper that was produced, it wasn't a formal agreement, but was produced then from Istanbul, the Istanbul, if you like, understanding, did include the possibility of some guarantees to Ukraine. And those would be those guarantees, but again, would be primarily the Security Council members like China. It might include others like India, maybe France or Britain, but it would be subject to permission of the guarantors, of which Russia and China would be both guarantors. And then it would only happen if Russia acceded. So I think we're moving actually more to a period of escalation in this area. I think Trump is under pressure, many pressures from Epstein, pressures from the Senate, who are giving him hard time over sanctions and tariffs, pressures from, if you like, the dark establishment, the security state, if you like, and also from Israel. So he's under these huge pressures, and he has, above all, the unstated pressure that is always there he has to fix the economy. And that is probably the primordial task facing him, is how to deal with American debt, how to get that sorted out. And things are changing. And I think things are changing in a way which suggests that we're coming towards escalation. And this is coming about mainly through the fact the prism of Israel. I can explain it if that would be useful.
Yeah, I would actually like to know how it ties in, but on the escalation part, because uh, when negotiations doesn't work and the Russians are now, well, appear to be winning, as well, the front lines are cracking more and more at a faster pace, one assumed that the natural reaction would be a bit of a panic and escalation. And indeed, Trump he recently tweeted that the Ukrainians would have to go on the offensive if they wanted to win, and then they apparently also signed off on selling a few thousand ERAM long-range missiles. Meanwhile, you have Zelensky saying that more or less that the Russians would have to feel the war as well, suggesting, yeah, the Russian civilians. I, what is the possible?
I mean, escalation for what? I don't think we're going to see an escalation that is going to militarily change the paradigm that exists on the ground, on the battlefield. Now, you could call it an escalation, and this is where the missiles come in, and I think it's quite likely that may happen. But, and it was mooted even before. I remember also the Washington Post was articles talking about the Tomahawks possibly being brought in. That, I believe, has been vetoed. But now we're talking about other missiles coming in. But, this isn't, the question is, what is this? It's not going to change, let's be straight, it's not going to change the situation on the ground. It is an alternative, if you like. It is that if you can't win militarily on the battlefield, then you can present defeat as a victory by doing something like sending missiles into St. Petersburg and Moscow and saying, oh, look, you see, Russia's still feeling the pain. It hasn't, if not, they haven't scored a victory because look, these missiles are coming in and it's affecting his base and, people are getting anxious about it. So it's again narrative change. You're going to swap a real sense of victory for a narrative of victory, which is, oh, look at, we can still, the Ukrainians are still sending missiles into the distance of Ukraine. The problem with this is the only way they can do that is with the help of the Americans. And the Americans know then they become a co-belligerent in the war, or the Germans, or the British, or the French, or whatever, and they will hit back. And what we see at the moment is the escalation coming from Russia, not from the United States. Russia is hitting back. There was an American company, American-owned company in Ukraine making electronic components. Some of those components may or may not have gone into drones of Ukraine, but it's been destroyed. The first American fully owned company, I think, that the Russians have destroyed with a Diesen missile. Then there has been the Turkish drone factory. That has been destroyed. Well, Turkey is a NATO member, but that has been destroyed in Kiev in these recent bombardments. The one making the Bactria drone missiles has been destroyed. And then there was the German sort of Potemkin village where they were pretending they're not giving missiles to Ukraine, but then, somehow Ukraine would be assembling them on their own on Ukraine territory. And the three components to that enterprise have all been destroyed by Russia. So there is a pushback, but I would have to explain why this is sort of becoming more and more inevitable, and for that I do have to return paradoxically um, to Israel and Iran, because I think what we've seen in this period um, has been a transformation. There's been, first of all, a transformation in Israel towards a much more, I mean, we follow quite closely the Israeli Hebrew press, and they talk about it very clearly as being the old Zionism is gone, finished. The old Zionism, it founded a state, it created it created the state, it created sort of institutions, but it's over. It's tending towards violence and militarized violence. And they talk about that in very clear terms. Barbarianism. I mean, one of the Israeli commentators describes it, who's in Haaretz. You can only read it in Hebrew, it's not in English version. Yossi Klein says, this is third stage Zionism is a form of barbarism. He's thinking of Gaza, but he's also thinking about Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, all of these things together. And my point about this is, why is this important? It is because Trump and his team, of course, have throughout this period unwaveringly supported Israel in its massacring of the Palestinians and in its other adventures, and were co-belligerents with Israel in the attack on Iran on the 13th of June. I mean, it's quite clear that that's been planned for some months jointly between the United States and Israel for the attack on Iran. And what is significant about the Iran attack was quite clearly it was intended to sort of collapse what the Israelis call the house of cards that was Iran. It was not just wasn't about the nuclear issue really at all. It was about collapsing the house of cards, because coming out of this is a sort of new sort of sense, when we talk about Israeli policy. I mean, not only is it very evidently a militarized policy, but it is about imposition by military means, whether it is treaties that are being imposed by military means in Syria or in Lebanon or attempted in Yemen. And all of these are really to try and create a dependence. Now, I think originally when you listened to Witkoff and others, the idea was, actually there would be a voluntary normalization with Israel from all around the region leading up to Iran. But that's not what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with an imposed. I mean, to make these states basically clients of Israel and clients of the United States. It's very obvious in Lebanon, for example, that that's what it is being done. So this has made Iran really rethink, I think, itself, because the Supreme Leader said this very clearly in a statement earlier this week. And he said, no, this is not about negotiations. It's not about a nuclear agreement. They want us to be obedient, to be subject of Israel and the United States. They want us dependent and not in any other way. And he says, to those who say we should negotiate with America, to those who say, well, can't we come to terms with the West and the United States, the E3 or whatever like that? The Supreme Leader said, you're missing the point. That isn't what they want. They want our submission. They want us to, if you like, to give up our sovereignty, our independence. And we will never, ever do this. And so inevitably, this process is taking, because even the Israelis, in a recent report that just came out by the INSS Institute in Israel, said, actually what happened in those 12 days following the attack on Iran was that the Iranian people came together and are now more solidified. And it says, unfortunately, there's no sign, in fact, no sign at all of discontent with the government or popular disaffection in Iran. That's gone. They're lamenting it because it's an Israeli produce. And they say, rather contradictory, they say, but it should still be the object of Israel to overthrow the government, to overthrow the Iranian state. And they say that even though they say, unfortunately, what happened on the 13th was such a mess that it's actually made it even less likely that that can be done, because basically the people have come together and there's been a show of unity. So it's inevitably then we are moving towards war. This is the only way finally it can be concluded. And where the nuclear project comes into this is simply not so much in what really happened in Nantas or Fordown. It is much more the question that the Israelis say, well, what do we know? I mean, what can we do? The Iranians, they are clever at technology. They know it. They know how to manage technology. So even if all of the elements are destroyed, even if all of the components or the enrichment are destroyed, and I don't think Israel believes that has happened at all. In fact, it's pretty obvious they don't believe that. But even if it had been destroyed, they say, just start again and do it again. So the only sure way of making it guarantees that Iran cannot move to a weapons state is to change the government and to put in a Western Pahlavi proxy to run it like a Shah on Israel's behalf, to make it a sort of kind of the United States. So this sort of inexorable move, in other words, what I'm saying is you can see components of this thinking of, if you like, of not so much, people coming to normalization because in a voluntary way, but through imposed pressure, has been absorbed and is sort of bleeding into the American way of thinking about geopolitics, in the sense that, they openly adopt the idea of decapitation. This, was said very clearly by Hexad about Yemen. Of course, we're trying to kill the Houthi leadership. We're going to decapitate the leadership. They talk about it in approving of assassination. Yes, it'd be quite right to assassinate the supreme leader in Iraq. They endorse that. And they endorse the idea of destroying the institutions of the state. We saw that very clearly in Syria. So that sort of whole way of thinking is sort of moved in. And what does it mean? I think it means really that, the West has moved much more to the sense that, we actually, because we cannot fight wars, we don't have the wherewithal, the weapons, the money to fight wars everywhere, as we used to think of it. And, even RAND organizations and others say that, America at best can deal with one war at a time, but not so. So then, and this is what Trump has moved to, is moved to a sort of policy of coercion, financial coercion, but a sort of a calibrated dependency coercion. So, it wanted to make India dependent and thus pull it out of the BRICS. The whole idea of the ceasefire, which would be not only against Putin's interest, but would sort of pull Russia into a prolonged, struggle against the Ukraine that would be built up again in due course. And all the other elements was to not only just weaken Russia, but to make it so much more dependent, a subject, not a sovereign, in this new, very carefully sort of financialized war. And also the threat that comes out with that. You have to pay us. We have to pay it. You have to pay it. You have to pay for everything you get. And we want more money. Well, the Europeans have sort of succumbed to that completely because they always liked the dependency on the United States anyway. And so they gave up their sovereignty pretty freely. But Iran is not going to. Russia, and we see China very obviously, paying hardball with Trump. It's there, no, we're not buying your soya beans. Sorry, we're going to get them from Brazil instead. And so, American farmers, soybean farmers are going bankrupt. I mean, it's become a serious effort. So this is moving, it seems, either to a resolution, to an escalation to more serious war, or else we're going to see everything change by some unexpected event like a financial crisis, which should change the whole the landscape in many ways. Perhaps that's now becoming more likely, but I mean, nonetheless, there's been a sort of progression of the United States normalizing more and more of what Israel has been doing. This changed Israel, not the Israel of, the Europeanized, of kibbutzniks and European and liberal Israel, but of this new messianic Israel that says, no, it's fine to, decapitate it. It's fine actually to follow the pattern. And it's mandatory to follow the pattern of Amalek. And as the Torah says twice, Amalek must be destroyed. This is an obligation, not a choice. So this is sort of percolated and is changing, I think, of course, I'm not suggesting that all Americans think like this, and there are different factions and different interests in the United States. But those are complex structures. But even in America, it's becoming much more eschatological, particularly when you look at things like the silicon for the gang of for Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Andreessen, and Sachs, David Sachs. They're all talking in much more apocalyptic terms. In fact, Peter Thiel has a series of lectures that are about to start in New York, I think this month, about the Cataclysm and about Armageddon, and about trying to bring back the ideas and thinking about Armageddon, an old Christian, this sort of apocalyptic, early Christian thinking into the present day. And okay, he's one person, but those tech oligarchs together are quite a powerful influence, and they have they're a very different constituency to the MAGA constituency. I'm not sure how long they can coexist because they're quite different constituencies. But I mean, they are in a front, but they are completely opposed to what they might understand about an economy. They want a real economy that provides real employment, whereas the tech oligarchs think in terms of AI and tech becoming a monopoly, which will provide huge rent to them and will be subject to, will become increasingly abstract and remote from people. And people will only play a certain part. Very different to what I think the mega people are thinking. So this is why I think there is a dynamic towards some form of escalation. Because put basically, if America is determined that it's got to maintain its primacy, and other states are not only rising, but asserting their sovereignty and their reluctance to accept dependency and vassalage of the US, then there's going to be a clash at some point. And that clash could be a very serious clash. But on the other hand, we may find something happen, events taking out of the blue, like a financial crisis, which may change everything.
It appears that we might be walking towards that. Of course, the US is having a problem, but Britain, France, Germany, the economies do appear to be entering some difficulties. But you can never time these things, though. But I wanted to follow up on this.
But United States too is
Yes.
It's not. I know we all are, I mean, the cabinet says how wonderful the economy going, everything like this. But, look what's happening in the bond market, look what's happening. Generally, I think we're going to see, great difficulties ahead. Strange things are happening. I just wrote about it. There was reported, we don't know who, but there's been a huge buyer of physical gold in New York, in New York, unknown buyer, buying no less than 2,000 metric tons of gold, physical gold. Equivalent to about 25% of the total American stockpile of gold. And who doesn't see mind much about price? What's going on? We know that Trump wants to devalue the dollar to sort of try and bring back industry and so on. Maybe we're looking at something more substantive. A devaluation, not just a few percent like the original Glasgow Accords, which was something more substantial. I don't know. No one really knows what's going on, but we see the ructions that the Federal Reserve, the attempt by Trump to take control of that institution so that he can bring back cheap loans and credit. That's his vision, and that's been all his vision as a New York businessman. There's plenty of low-cost debt is what we need to get through.
On the topic of Russia escalating, though, whenever people speak of Russia escalating, the thought of the Oreshnik always comes into mind. And given that, everything from the US planning to introduce missiles in Germany to these long-range missiles being sold to Ukraine, how likely do you think it is that Russia might start using the Oreshnik missile, and what would be the consequences?
I think this depends hugely on what Washington, because we don't really know still. It's really bizarre after all this time. Trump talks the talk of peace, but he walks the walk of war. We see that in Venezuela and we see it in other places. He has no hesitation. There was a piece just I was reading today in Haaretz, where they were saying, well, if you take the Israeli cabinet, which is a very right-wing cabinet, as you know, and you take Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and you add to that Netanyahu and Derma, who's the sort of talking person with Trump on one side, and then you have the others on it, Aryeh Deri and Ernst. Then he said you'd find Trump on the far right. That's where he's positioned. So, I mean, and that's why, and I don't know what hold it is that Israel has over Trump, but clearly Trump in some ways seems drunk from being able to bring about a solution in Gaza, other than, the his celebrated solution for Gaza with its high rises and casinos, and all the Palestinians gone. So, I mean, tension is mounting in the Middle East. Very, very obviously. Politics is becoming very brittle. Wherever you look around, as you know, there's been now a decapitation strike in Yemen. The Israelis have just last night and the night before tried to destroy the leadership of Yemen. I mean, again, as I say, what you hear from Washington, of course, with Europe, nothing. I mean, this is now normalized. Yes, it's okay. I mean, the Houthis are above us, and to destroy them is okay. I mean, we are in it, because it's been gradual. I don't think people are seeing how much we have changed, from our politics, of even going back a few years. American politics were not like this, and we're very cautious about endorsing Israeli targeting assassination. And now it seems to be sort of open territory in many ways. So it has moved, but also seriously, because of the financial aspect of it, it's become so much about, tariffs are now a weapon, and shock and awe tariffs is what they are called. So the shock and awe tariffs are a weapon, but also dependency is become, you make yourself dependent. You agree to being dependent on the United States under pressure, coercive, calibrated dependency. This is what India was facing in this last period. And what happens is gets weaponized against you. You have to do it or else. Or else you do what Modi did and seems to be refusing the telephone calls from Trump now. I mean, and where is he? He's in Beijing, making it up, with the Chinese, because he knows that, Trump's offer to him, okay, well, we'll turn the blind eye to you selling off, refined products to Europe taken from refined from Russian oil, but you're going to have to open your markets to American agricultural and animal products. I mean, India can't do that. It is a basic, rural community of, small farmers surviving. It would be a catastrophe for India. It would destroy the political base, let alone the social and economic base. Anyway, the mood in India is changing dramatically. And this is what I mean by this weaponizing dependency. I mean, look what he's done to the European Union. It made it totally dependent now on the United States. It's going to be checkmark. Now, have you paid enough billions? Was there enough investment coming in? How many, how much liquefied natural gas have you absorbed? And if you do anything, and you've opened your markets completely to our agricultural products and others coming in, but we're still going to put 50% more generally, and a bit more on steel and aluminium. And as I say, they wanted dependency because they thought somehow this would ease the path for them on Ukraine. I'm not sure that it's worked. Probably hasn't. But I think that was their calculus. Somehow they would be very nice to Trump, and then, security guarantees would be sort of forthcoming. and criteria, for their niceness in accepting a 5% NATO surcharge. What have they got? No.
How do you explain, though, what has happened to us, I mean, the West? Because, as you said, this decapitation strike on Yemen is just another normal thing. We're openly now talking about war with Russia, again, the world's largest nuclear power, as if it would be nothing. We blow off nuclear deterrence as blackmail. We're now complicit in genocide against the Palestinians. Striking Iranian nuclear reactors is, well, again, doesn't get any reactions. Tariffs as a weapon is common. Stealing sovereign assets from the Russians. Preventing the technological rise of China, and even threatening our own friends in India. And of course, you mentioned the Europeans, just casually referring to Trump as a daddy and signing economic agreements they themselves recognize doesn't make any sense. How do you explain what is going on? Because each one of these things would have been a very difficult thing to imagine only about 5-10 years ago. Even, we had sanctions against, well, there were efforts, for example, to sanction China, but at least it would be dressed up in the language of human rights sanctions or something. Now all of this is just gone out the window. How do you explain what is happening to the West at the moment?
Well, there has been a big change, particularly in the United States, and particularly, I don't want to single out just those, the tech oligarchs, but particularly among, if you like, the donor class of politics in America. The donor class has become very convinced on its own rights, that it has earned this money, it will spend it as it likes, it is totally selfish. And the sort of sense that the community, that it owes a responsibility to anyone, it has a sort of moral, if you like, responsibility to the American people as a whole, the community. That's largely gone, and that the collapse, I think, probably of Western liberalism has left this big void, and it's being filled to a certain extent with this sort of amoral sense that, I should be able to be free to make as much money as I want. There should be no restrictions. There should be no regulations. It should be just, I can use it as I want. I can do what I want. And, to hell with all the people, that are complaining or feeling that they're left out. We don't care about that. And, that is also part of Trump, too. We have this disparity because you see elements of this sort of Silicon thinking, as I say, present in that element. It was crucial to his election. The Silicon oligarchs and many of the oligarchs shifted and came to support it, and with a lot of money. No, he didn't have all of the billionaires, but he had a lot of the billionaires. But he crucially had more of the ultra rich rather than just the billionaire. He and they have been setting. So what was the big beautiful bill? Well, huge cuts in taxes for corporations and deregulation on one side of that, and if you like, privatization, Medicare being cut down, and a few little tidbits given to the MAGA. But basically, it was to the donor class. The tax on them has gone down dramatically under the big beautiful bill. And debt has gone up by another will go up by another 3.4 trillion. So, this is the uneasy, what I've been trying to say, the uneasy tensions which you have there, coupled with the fact, and why I think we've moved to this dependency sort of approach, financial shock and all, and then making people, and then weaponizing dependency, is because of the deep state, the permanent security apparatus. They don't want to see, they calculate it's necessary to see Russia as being, if you like, in a state of dependency and weakness, particularly vis-a-vis China and Iran, and that it has to be suppressed down to that level. I don't think that means necessarily, using nuclear weapons on Russia. It is, as I say, a sort of calibrated coercion into dependence. Is how I would describe this foreign policy now, and obtained mostly by financial pressures, by targeting certain areas of life, and then in ensuring that the dependency is there, and that therefore Russia is not a beacon of opposition to the United States, is not displaying its sovereignty, is accepting dependency, it's accepting submission to the United States. And so I think that element, these are the deepest structures of the deep state, the idea that Russia should not be allowed to become. And when I said, about the change in Israeli thinking and how somehow it's sort of leached across in a certain extent into some quarters of American thinking. Look at what you see from Europeans. I mean, how can one say that? I mean, I don't know if you saw that interview recently with Macron when he was talking about Putin, and he said Putin is extremely dangerous. Russia is a threat. Russia, he expressed it. Russia has to eat. It's a predator. It's a predator at our door. I mean, very strong symbolic language. The beast on the doorstep. He said it's a predator. It's a predator, a cannibal. He used the word cannibal. Putin is the predator, cannibal, sitting at our doorstep, threatening Europe. I mean, we know what he's referring to. I mean, this goes back to old, Christian imagery of the Antichrist. Putin is the Antichrist. He's the opposite of everything we value and we stand for. Russia is everything that is dangerous. I mean, because he starts off saying how dangerous he is, how threatening he is, this predator, this cannibal, just waiting to eat him. I mean, you can see the interviews on French television. But language like that goes right down to some of the deepest images, even if we are secular, westernized in many ways. But, we all remember those images in the past of, the devil moving people into hell, and the things from, living in Italy. You can't go into a church without seeing these wonderful, sort of very vivid images of, the black Manichaean opposition to European values and things like this. So, I mean, this is eschatological as much as, people say Israel is eschatological. I wrote 10 years ago, I wrote a paper saying that I believe 10 years hence, this was at the time of the attacks in Syria and the ISIS starting war, and I said, I believe in the future, the wars will be about the symbols of religion. Al-Aqsa on one hand, and the Temple Mount on the other. And this will be, if you like, the symbols around which war will be centered. And I mean, Macron just says it. Russia is pagan. It had to go back to the schism of 1,000 years ago. We had to get rid of Constantinople. We had to get rid of these. Anyone who spoke Greek was therefore pagan and a heretic and should be dealt with. The Franks took over the papacy at that time, but we remember what happened to the Catholics. Well, we don't remember because nothing exists. They were just erased from history. So, he's digging into deep imagery in Europe, and Trump, in his recent statements, again, goes back into these sort of symbolisms. You think just in this cabinet meeting, someone said, "Well, what about Russia?" And I think I'm not probably quoting it verbatim, but he said pretty much, well, he said, all of this that Putin says he wants to do a peace process. I mean, that's just bullshit. It's nothing. I mean, he's posturing. He's just posturing. And that is, I think, the deep sense of that eschatological divide that, these people, whether they're Palestinians or Russian, I mean, they're just posturing. They have no arguing. They've got nothing to say for themselves. They're just simply people who are bluffing. I mean, this is the language of Kellogg, General Kellogg. Oh, yeah, we have to call Putin's bluff. He's just a posture. It's just, we put him up pressure and he'll collapse and he'll have his tail between his legs and he will agree to the ceasefire that we're demanding, which will slowly squeeze him and imprison and weaken him over the years ahead until finally we can get rid of him and we can turn our attention to China.
These comments by Macron, though, they are interesting because on one hand he's referring to Putin as this beast which has to feed. On the other hand, while warning against the great dangers of Russia, he's also pointing out that there's no rush for peace because Russia only took less than 1% of Ukraine. So this is a common theme, though, where Russia is always playing two roles. Either this a tremendous beast preparing to consume Europe, at the same time it's just pathetically weak almost. I often cite this Jewish scholar, Viktor Klemperer, who said this was kind of the Nazi rhetoric against the Jews. Hitler was always either referring to them as pathetically weak or a threat to Western civilization altogether. So there was, doing both, both at the same time, often in the same breath. So it's kind of interesting. But so your conclusion then is that because the West is changing, they're looking for making Russia obedient, just continuing pressure. Is this why the Russians are now, I guess, under pressure to escalate, or?
I think the West, ultimately, they are really frightened, and I think they're desperate. They can see, that, for Europeans, what's in front of them. There's certainly going to be financial stress, maybe major stress, let alone in America, and they're frightened of their electorates. So they have to build up, how do you keep the European Union such that it is together? Well, you say Russia, war. And so on the one hand, the German chancellor says, we can't afford to have a welfare system anymore. It's beyond our means. It's too expensive for us. And at the same time says, well, we're going to look at compulsory military service. Well, to start with, it'll be voluntary, but then not enough people come, then we'll make it compulsory. These are echoes. Again, it's the imagery evoking the images of the 30s and the wartime period of evoking, the need for conscription, and we're all there behind the state, and we've got to be together against a common enemy that was Hitler at the time. I mean, all leaders like Churchill and so on played on this. And this is really an extent because I think that the elites, the European elites, totally out of touch with with their own electorates, who despise them, and they despise the electorates, and each knows that the other feels about it, and so they are trying to sort of both double down on control, but also, try and find, this new means, and also a means to sort of raise new money. It used to be, the green process, net zero, we're going to have to invest, borrow money, put it into the green. Now, if we have to put money into the military system, we've got to borrow money to put it into the military. And who knows, that might, it could actually trigger us like upturn in the whole economy and save us from what is likely to happen to the big downturn in the European economy.
Well, thank you for your insights on this. It's interesting. I noticed the strikes now, the Russian strikes close to the British consulate and the European mission in Kiev as well. I think it was misrepresented that they was targeting them, but nonetheless, no. But I think the willingness to strike nearby them, that I don't know. It seems that the Russians might be losing some of their patience, which is why I was worried about the
Well,
Oreshnik and all of these things. But again, you just got back from Russia recently. I'm not sure if you have that impression as well, that they kind of reaching the bit of the end of the line in terms of patience.
no, I think they're getting angry. I mean, I think they're getting angry.
Yeah.
Russians were getting angry about it. They're really angry about, the pettiness of Europe, that conductors of orchestras cannot come to Europe. They're very angry. That many of them have lost properties in Europe. Many Russians have properties, and they had properties in Italy. But if you can't pay the rent, if you can't pay the taxes, they're seized by the police and auctioned off. And, when the Europeans turn on them and they say, well, all of these sanctions and these, you deserve, is what they say to the Russians. And they're angry about that. They say, well, we can be wooed back at Europeans. And I think there's been a lot of pressure on Putin, to be a little bit harsher. I mean, Europeans and Americans always like to go, just push a little further, push a little further, push a little further. And so we're seeing a little bit of pushback. I think actually what happened with where there was damage to those two buildings in Kiev, British Council and other, was because actually it was an attack on another target, which was an SBU data headquarters, which was put in the urban area. And this was there were collateral damage from a major explosion that took place. I mean, they don't seem to be that badly damaged. She said it wasn't direct strikes from the videos or photographs that I've seen anyway. So I think there is a great anger and a great sense. You've got to translate this into something more profound for the Russians, which is, we have spent blood getting to this point. We put a lot of, our own soldiers' blood into this process. If we end up with a sort of Minsk III, a deal that is not a deal with a sort of phony ceasefires and all of that they had in the former Minsk agreement, they said, all it means is this investment in blood is not probably being used, and we will have to pay a second installment of blood in 3 or 4 years' time. after the West has rearmed and retrained what rumped Ukraine, whatever rumped Ukraine is, to be a platform to weaken us, to be a long-term. It's like, it's like Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan during that period. I mean, the aim was just to sort of bleed Russian political will. And now I think, the determination of Europe, and this is why they won't come to an agreement. The determination is to go back to that Brzezinski formula that he said, affected by that, the area of the rim land and the heartland, that Russia with Ukraine becomes a major heartland power. Russia without Ukraine just becomes a regional power. And that's what Brzezinski put in his chessboard book, saying we can't allow, Ukraine to be within the Russian sphere of interest. Wasn't talking about precise territories or borderlands, but Ukraine, useful Ukraine, mustn't be allowed to go into the sphere of interest. That is a strategic necessity for us.
Well, thanks again. And yeah, I'm hoping you're wrong about escalation, but you're pretty much spot on there. So, well, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to talk to your audience.